I'm going to go ahead and pull this back out. And I'm going to take off some of the sheathing on this wire here. I'll take off probably about 3/4 of an inch of sheathing here. And so I'm going to use my 12 gauge setting on the tool. Pull that off. And I'll take my screwdriver and loosen the screw. Go ahead and put this in here. So on the back of this particular breaker there's a slot there. So the wire needs to go between those two metal pieces there. I'll tighten down nice and snug, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a tug to make sure it's in there correctly. Okay. Now I'll go ahead and pop my breaker in. This breaker, by the way, is turned off, just so you know. So it's in the off position. That breaker's in. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wire up my neutral and my ground wires to the bus bars up there at the top of the panel. Those are on this side over here. So I'll start with the neutral first. And how I want to do this, I want to route this around the back of the panel here. And I want to do it in a way so that it's not really messy. I don't have a bunch of wire kind of flopping all over the place in here. So I'm going to go underneath this main wire here. Determine how long that is. I'm going to find a spot. I'm going to put it on this spot down here on the bus bar. So make sure I know how long that is first. Okay. Okay, so that was a bit tricky getting that wire up there, but it's in there. What I'm going to do now is just go ahead and tighten it down using the flathead screwdriver. Okay, so that's tightened down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach my ground wire, and the ground bus bar is up closer to the top of the panel. So I'll route that behind here also. Okay, ground wire is finally in there, and I'll go ahead and tighten it down. Nice and snug. Okay, so I've got my white wire in, which is my neutral wire. I've got my ground wire nice and snug. Okay, so I made up this diagram to show my layout for the GFCI and the standard outlet that I'm putting in. I could have put in a GFCI breaker, but I had this GFCI outlet, so I decided to go ahead and use that and just use a standard breaker. So as you can see here, these two outlets, this is the GFCI, there's a standard outlet, they're wired in what's called in series. This diagram looks a little complicated, so what I'm going to do is just talk through how you would wire up a standard outlet and how you wire up a standard GFCI outlet if you were to wire those up on their own. So here's the standard outlet here. So you have your black wire, which provides your power to your outlet, and it goes into the hot terminal, which is usually a brass colored terminal on your outlet. Then the white wire connects up to your neutral terminal, which is usually a silver colored terminal screw, and that carries the power back to the panel. And then you have your ground wire, which acts as It's sort of a safety feature just in case, for example, the white wire were to short. You'd have somewhere for the electricity to go, as opposed to whatever device you're using becoming hot. The Gfci is very similar. The difference between the Gfci and the standard outlet, though, is that you can see here it's what's called line neutral and line hot. So the power comes in from the breaker panel to the line hot, and then it leaves the Gfci via the line neutral back to the panel. Also, there are load terminals on the Gfci, and those load terminals are so you can connect up additional outlets or switches down line from the Gfci. So the Gfci would essentially act as a almost like a panel for those additional outlets. And then you have a ground wire that also goes back to the panel. So my setup here, I've got the Gfci here, then I've got my regular outlet here. So I'll have power coming into the Gfci via the line. It's going to connect up to the line hot terminal on the Gfci. And then there's a line neutral which carries the electricity back to the panel. Off of this particular Gfci, I'm going to have a load which will be my standard outlet. So there'll be a black wire that goes from the load hot on the Gfci and goes to the hot of the standard outlet. And then that power has to go back to the Gfci via the neutral on the standard outlet to the load neutral on the Gfci. So again, the Gfci in this situation almost acts like a panel in that the power flows from the Gfci to the standard outlet and back. Then you have your ground here. So that's how this is going to look. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is just clip off a little bit of this. So this is the white and the black wire that I cut off the original line that I had down here inside the breaker box. So I'm going to take those remnants and I'm going to use those to create my connections from the Gfci to the standard outlet. And all I'm going to do is take off about 3/4 of an inch of the sheathing. And so I'll do that first. Do that to the white and to the black on one end. So that's off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little hook here so that I can hook these wires onto these terminals here. And I want to have the hook going clockwise because when I screw this on, I'm going to be screwing clockwise. If I was to put this on counterclockwise, when I screw clockwise, it could slip off. So that's how I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to make a little loop here, and how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the wire, put it in this tool, and then I'm just going to twist kind of like that. And it makes a little hook there. I'll do the same thing to the other end. So I'm going to do that to all the wires, and then I'll show how it looks in the end. I want to keep I don't want to have too much wire exposed, so once I get it hooked around here, I don't want to have a bunch of wire hanging out, exposed out here to where I can have a possible short happen. So I want to keep as much wire around the terminal as possible. So it should look something like that when I'm done. Okay, so I've got my two outlets connected now, just like I showed in the diagram. This is how they're going to look inside the box there. And as you notice on the back, both wires, all the wires are underneath the terminal screws. There's a tiny bit of insulation underneath the terminal screws too. Same thing on this side. So the next thing I'm going to do now is just go ahead and connect up all the wiring that's coming from the box to this set of outlets here. And I also need to connect up the ground wires. I'm going to be using a pigtail for the ground wires. So I'll show that in a second. So I've got my 2 outlets ready to go in. The last thing to do is to connect up the ground wire. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have, as I mentioned, I'm going to do a pigtail where I'm going to have one wire coming from the GFCI and another wire coming from the standard outlet. And then this ground wire will connect up with those 2 wires, and I'll put a wire nut on that. Okay, so I've just finished taking my lineman's pliers and just twisted these wires together. These are the ground wires. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is put a wire nut on those. Make sure it's nice and snug here. So it's nice and snug there. Those are all twisted together. I've got all the ground wires connected up, and I'm going to go ahead and what I've done also taken some black tape and wrapped it around this wire nut here, make it a little more secure. I'm going to go ahead and stuff this back in the hole here, back inside the box. It's a lot of wires, so it's going to be a little bit of an effort to get this back in. That's good for now. I may have to straighten this one on the left a little bit more. It's tilted kind of that way. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn the power back on. And when I turn the power on, I want to have my face pointed opposite the box. I don't want to be looking at the box just in case something sparks in here. So I got all my wires in here, everything's good. I got my wire going to my neutral, my wire going to my ground, and my wire going to my breaker. These are all nice and secure. So I'll turn on the main first. Okay. Now what I want to do next is I want to flip on my new breaker, and you can see down there on the GFCI the light's on. Green light's on right there. And I'm going to go ahead and test this GFCI by putting the tester in here. So on the top of the tester, you can see there, this little legend here shows that correct is when the 2 yellow lights are on. As you can see, the 2 yellow lights are on, so we're good. And so I'll assume that this one's probably the same. Yep, it's good. I'm going to do the same thing for the standard outlet using this other tester. Once again, the 2 yellow lights mean that it's correctly wired. And I'll just repeat it here. I don't really have to, but you can see that's correctly wired. So that's all good. So what I'm going to do now is just reverse the order of putting the cover back on and put the plate on this outlet, this new set of outlets here. I'm going to turn the power back off first before I do that, and then I'll show you the finished product. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the circuit breaker panel cover back on, and I've got my new outlet added to my list of circuits in here, and I've got my outlet cover back on, the green light's still on, everything looks good. So that's it. Thanks for watching.